Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities. Our mission is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living by offering unique and ecologically sustainable co-living options. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living, in addition to bringing you interesting people from around the world who are doing cool things to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life who want to enjoy the best of independent and group living. To find out more about us, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. Glad to have you and glad to have Joanna Bianco back with me with Earthflower Farms. You may remember that she and her business partner, Staci Diamond King, were on not too long ago, and we pledged/threatened to get back on together again and explore some other things. So today we're going to talk everything mushrooms and explore that. And I'll have a bunch of questions, and hopefully, let me just make this announcement. We're just starting to publicize the podcast in advance so that anybody that would like to listen in and ask questions would be able to join. So if you look down in the show notes, you'll see the ability to add our calendar link, which will show you all the podcasts that are coming up and allow you to register, and we'll send you a link and you can join us to ask questions. Otherwise, it'll be up to me today. So Joanna, welcome back, and thanks for joining us.
It's good to be back. Yeah, I'm here to talk about mushrooms today. I guess what better place to start than where it all started. There is a theory known as panspermia, and it's the theory that all life on Earth originated from asteroids, comets, rocks, random space junk just flying around and hitting Earth. As you know, before life was on Earth, Earth was quite a chaotic place. It was just a big floating rock in space, and all sorts of different asteroids would hit it. That's how we got our moon. Was a big asteroid hit it, spilled out some of our Earth stuff, and it's rotating around us to this day. But panspermia is the theory actually brought up in the 5th century by a Greek philosopher, who had the idea that all of the little spores, and this is before the spores were really known, but life, the little seeds of life, so spores as we know today, which are proven to be space proof. Like they are able to be in the pressure of space, the vacuum of space, withstand like stupid amounts of radiation and not die. Like, if me and you went out to space, we wouldn't last very long. But spores, they've got this hard shell around them, and they protect the little seed of life that is within them. So you have comets bringing water, you've got the rocks, and now suddenly you've got all these spores on Earth. And so the first fungi, they originated before everything else. They started dissolving the rocks with the oxalic acid. It's known that lichens, which are a algae mushroom or algae fungal hybrid, just like living in a single organism, much like a human being, which we'll get to that later. They secrete oxalic acid, which is able to dissolve rock, dissolve it, break it down into minerals. And because of that, soil exists, and we're able to use it. I mean, these minerals, these original minerals broken down by the fungi are in our bones, in our skin, and the minerals in our foods, in our soil to this day. And none of this would have been possible without fungi, without panspermia. bringing all that life here. The seeds of life were sown when all of the animals were starting to evolve, all the plants were starting to evolve, everything was in the water. The water was just like a little amniotic sac that everything could just live in. But obviously to this day we still have like plants outside. And how they get there, they could not get there before mushrooms assisted them, before fungi, the first fungi, helped bring the plants out of the water. There were these tall column fungi that were 3 meters tall, and they were the trees of the day. There's still fossils of them around today. They had lots of little holes in them, and the first crustaceans were able to crawl into them and make their homes, get their food. They would fall, all of that broken down rock that they were built up off of would decompose and just create the foundation layer of the soil. It created honestly like a body outside of the body of water for all life to really come out of the oceans with. um, because of that, trees were able to form, plants were able to form. Plants actually copied the roots that mycelium originally had. Mycelium had roots before plants had roots. Before, algae had to kind of cling on to mycelium to be able to come out of the water. And eventually they learned how to make roots of their own, but for the longest time they were in this symbiotic relationship where the plants would live on the fungi or live around the fungi, within them, around them, and the fungi and the plants would feed each other. Plants can produce the starch that fungi need to live, and fungi can regulate the nutrients that plants need to live. And they're really nice to each other. And to this day, even in the garden, and if anybody, I don't know if anybody uses fungi in their garden. If you don't, you should be. It is a very easy addition to add, and it makes your garden blow up, like by adding that mycelial fungi and really letting plants have that relationship with the soil that they did originally in the beginning of times. You see the effects in your harvests, you see the effects in the health of the plants and the health of the soil too, above everything. It helps with the exchange where the plants aren't just taking from the soil. There's taking and there's giving.
How do you add it, and what amounts, and how does it come? Talk a little bit about adding
Yeah,
that to the
I
garden.
I like the brand Mycos, but there are different inoculants. They call them inoculants available on the market. I do like Extreme Gardening's Mycos. It's their product. That's the company that makes it. It is a wonderful product. It comes in a couple different forms. There's a wettable powder that you can just add water to, and you can water your garden with it. There's also a granulated form that you could throw into the hole that you plant your plants in. The key is that it needs to make contact with the roots. You have to make sure that it really gets into the roots of the plant to attach to it. When you add it, you start to see that the plants are more than just their roots. On top of their roots, there is these little fine like threads of mycelium that like you pull the seedling out of its pot, and all of the soil is just like a sponge held together, and it's that mycelium that you added from the mycos, which is short for mycorrhizae. That's a really beneficial type of fungi that is used by Extreme Gardening and their inoculant. It helps regulate the plants, give them nutrients. It gives them it acts like a sponge, like a battery. So even if you're having a hot day and there's not a lot of water, like otherwise your garden would wilt, but the fungi will act as like a sponge, like a reserve. They'll act as this reserve to give the plants some of that water in their time of need, and it makes your garden a lot more resilient just having the fungi there to team up with it. But I do recommend Extreme Gardening's mycos.
Let's say you're planting cabbage type plants, so little seedlings. If you just mix it into the hole that you have dug and put some, put with everything else, even if it's not touching the tiny roots that are there on that little seedling, as long as it's in the hole, is that good enough so that when the roots do grow, it'll pick it up? Or does it have to be right around the the tiny roots that are with the seedling?
So I figure that so as long as it is very wet and the mycelium is able to germinate and form that web, it should be okay. But anytime I've read the packaging, it always says to make contact with the roots. So I'm going to go with that, that there should be some contact with the roots. I don't know if the mycelium does need to contact the roots to be able to activate, but that might be the case. And obviously there should be like constant water in those first few weeks just to make sure that that mycelium really settles. It attaches to the roots, like that it's necessary for that fungi to exist. It won't do as well without any roots to I don't want to say like without any roots to really attach to.
Remind me a little bit about your background. You have this dense knowledge of this subject in particular, and I know from our previous conversation, similar topics. Is this from academic research? Is this from your own passion and research? How did you come about this really dense knowledge about this? And then we'll keep going with mushrooms, but
Yeah,
I
no,
want to know where
happy
it comes
to answer
from.
that. So I'm a medical herbalist. I've got a degree in medical herbalism that didn't cover fungi that much, but I have been a master gardener for the last 10 years. I do a lot of nerdy book research in my own free time. I actually brought one of my books with me today. I have more of them and I can go get them if you want to see more of my reading material, but this book right here is Teaming with Fungi, The Organic Grower's Guide to Mycoremediation by Jeff Lowenfels. Um, this book taught me all that I really needed to know about mushrooms, functional mushrooms in the garden. I'm not talking about eating mushrooms. I'm talking about mushrooms that work with your garden. So I credit this book with a lot of my knowledge, and I recommend it to anybody who wants to learn more. I've also got other books when it comes to growing mushrooms, like edible mushrooms. And I've grown mushrooms myself. I grow shiitake mushrooms in my backyard. I have since 2017. They are a very interesting creature. Well, if you get into plants, it's only a matter of time before the mushrooms start to like get you. I've taken some other courses, like little side courses, with the Fungi Academy online, just to kind of expand my knowledge in this area.
Very good. I like the title, Teaming with Fungi.
Right? Yeah.
Nice play on words, isn't it?
I think it's quite creative.
So when other people are curled up on a rainy day with a trashy novel, you're curled up with a fungi book,
Yeah.
absorbing that information.
I'll take it to work with me sometimes too. If there's a little bit of a lull, I'll just kind of, pull my little weird book out. Sometimes I'll take the sleeve off of it so people don't think I'm weird.
Okay, so just to summarize about planting little seedlings, it's probably best and safest to have it in the immediate vicinity of the little seedling, and not just in the larger hole or larger mound that you're preparing, but to give it some contact. We're not sure if it takes that immediate contact with the roots to activate it, but just to be sure, get some of it in that area. That's what I'm taking from it.
As far as I've seen from any direction from the manufacturers, there should always be like some root contact. So I think it might need to just have to at least touch the roots a little bit to get going. It's crazy how it transforms the soil though after a couple of years of using it. I've used it for about 6 years now in my garden, the mycorrhizae, and it absolutely transforms your garden. I swear it like runs off and starts like decomposing everything. All the wood chips that I put in my garden, all the mulch that I put in my garden is all soil. Like sometimes on those nice rainy days, as soon as the rain dries up, while I go in my garden, I can like pull like a handful of soil out and you squeeze it and it all just sticks together, and you can see like these little white threads, and that it like ties it all together, and that's the mycelium. Adding wood chips and mulch is a huge addition of fungi. A lot of people use mulch for perennials, and it's actually a fact that perennials prefer a very fungal rich soil, much like a forest really relies on fungi to feed the whole thing. You know, the trees drop their leaves, the fungi breaks it down and feeds the forest for another year. You get that a lot in your garden. You can emulate that too in a food forest, in a garden. If you're growing a lot of perennials, you bring in the wood chips, and you'll notice after like or some rainy days, you'll get these rings of fungi that are like expanding out. It's wild. Anywhere that it's damper, you'll notice like rings on rings on rings of mushroom. Or a mycelium. I don't want to call them mushrooms. A lot of people associate mushroom with like the fruit of the mushroom, which you get a lot of too. But it's crazy when you start seeing that, like the mycelium running out, which is also another really good book. I recommend Mycelium Running if you want to like get into like, a little bit more of the nitty gritty nerdy stuff.
And be sure you send these titles, and we'll put them in the show notes.
Perfect.
So let's see. Before I forget, let's talk about the different types of mushrooms. And those of us raised in the 60s are familiar with a particular type of mushrooms that are hallucinogenic. I think Carlos Castaneda in his books talks mainly probably about peyote, if I remember.
Yeah.
And those, so let's talk about the whole range of mushrooms, and let's not ignore that that type. I've never indulged in them, and I think that if I remember correctly, the peyote mushroom, and that is a mushroom, right?
No, I know which book you're talking about. Carlos Castaneda is like one of my favorite authors. I like got into him when I was like 16. The Teachings of Don Juan was like one of my favorites. But that is a cactus. That is a hallucinogenic cactus sacred to the southwestern region. Produces a psychedelic experience. Not the same as the mushrooms, but comparable. It's like the mycelium of the desert essentially, because mushrooms don't grow in the desert nearly as well as the cacti do.
Yeah, I guess because he was doing mushrooms in the midst of all that, I guess I assumed that peyote was for mushrooms. Anyway, so give us an overview of types, and you're speaking of a particular type, and not the fruit. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, Mycorrhizae, even in its word, you have the word rhiz, right? Like rhizome, which indicates roots. So Mycorrhizae is a type of fungi that is symbiotic to plant roots, and that's the type that I work with when I'm gardening. I would divide mushrooms up or fungi up in the fungi that you use in your garden, like Mycorrhizae, that'll be symbiotic for your plants. You're not eating the Mycorrhizae, you're using it, you're teaming with it to produce food for yourself. Then there's edible mushrooms such as shiitake, maitake, turkey tail, lion's mane. All these mushrooms are able to be cultivated, and people do cultivate them. I got my spores from the mushroom people, good people, and you can inoculate logs and produce food for yourself as well. And then there are these sacred mushrooms, the Amanitas, the Amanita muscaria flyagric, which are really sacred in the Siberian areas, but they do live all over the globe. And it's actually believed that the Amanita muscaria mushroom had been brought over by the people that had come over the Bering Strait brought the Amanita with them. And I mean, you can only imagine that if these people who had to walk across the Bering Strait with only the things on their back, if they had room in that backpack for Amanita muscaria, it meant quite a great deal to them. And I can get a little bit more into that one, but you know, we've also got the cubensis, a little bit more popular, and honestly countless types of also hallucinogenic sacred mushrooms, which will be like my third category. Like, and this is just me making up categories. You got your mycorrhizae root mushrooms, you got your edible tasty yummy mushrooms, and then you got your sacred religious mushrooms, or fungi.
Where I was most recently living in southern Indiana, I think the mushroom is morel, and people hunt them as seriously as they do deer and animals. And it's in the springtime. It's a a topic of conversation in the bars and coffee shops. Have you found any mushrooms? I never indulged and went on the hunt. But what do you know about morel mushrooms?
Morels are really common around here too, and I live in the city. I live in Chicago, but on the like the Midwest, this Great Lakes area is very much the perfect environment for morels. Morels are not hallucinogenic, but they are priced almost as if they would be. They are a top tier culinary mushroom with a very distinctly umami taste to them. This that sixth flavor, that like that very savory. It is wonderful in dishes, and it goes for, I believe, $400 a dry pound. So
Wow.
they're looking for them for selling them, and I'm sure that if they're talking about them in the uh in the bars and in the cafes, they are not telling them anybody where they are finding them. Those grounds are so like protective. If you know where the morels are, you keep that to yourself. Like, that just stays between you and your family. You know, you don't want to be telling like, oh yeah, over there, that's where I get morels, or suddenly you're going to have a whole bunch of people coming and getting your morels.
Well, it does appear to be a sacred event, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
early spring,
It's
when
about the
things are just.
May, late April, early May, when you get a lot of rain and you get
Mhm.
still get cool nights, because you need a sequence of heavy rains, lots of moisture, and then some cool nights, but still warm days. So people, they look for the weather pattern, and when they start seeing the weather pattern, they go out.
Mhm. I'm seeing a lot back to wood chips and even wood logs, small logs in uh, planter gardens, tub gardens, that sort of thing, to put in the bottom, make sure there's lots of air in there, and sticks and leaves, but
Yeah.
entire small logs in a barrel type planter. So, and I'm seeing it in regular gardens too. And I would imagine this fungi really helped to break that down and make use of that.
Yeah, that would be something closer to like the mycorrhizae and the wood fungi, the leaf molds. The type of bed you're describing reminds me of like a hugelkultur bed. They're believe an Austrian, designed by Sepp Holzer, who had the idea, put like a bunch of logs, put a bunch of sticks, mushrooms, or sticks and leaves, and then you put soil over it, and it feeds the soil for 10 years. You don't have to fertilize your soil, because that stuff and the mycelium breaking it down will slow release fertilizer for all the plants growing in that soil layer on top of the mound. But yeah, that's all made with fungi. Leaves too are a great like a great food source for fungi. If you want lots of fungi in your garden, you could also, don't be that guy who takes your leaves, your precious leaves that fall on your ground, and you put them on the curb for another company to come grab them, compost them, and sell them back to you in the spring. You take those, you put them in a composter, or I'll lay mine out in the garden over the winter to protect the mycelium and protect the soil in my garden all winter long from the harsh conditions of the winter. And the leaf will break down, a leaf mold will actually take over it, and I can have leaves up to my knees in the fall when I'm dumping it there, and it will turn into a layer 1 inch thick after a whole winter.
It's interesting that you mentioned that term. Say it again. I think it's a German term,
Hugelkultur.
Kugelkultur.
Yes.
So my guest in the last podcast, Ken Kleiber, he referenced it and was talking about doing terrace type gardening on the way down a hill and um, piling up the dirt, excuse me, piling up the dirt below on top of logs. And if you've got a slight incline, to build a terrace of those logs with the dirt, slowing down the water runoff. And he even talked about angling it. So you'd have one terrace angling in one direction, and then it would go around and pick up and go back the other direction. So a sort of zigzag pattern of the water, and using logs to build up the terrace in order to build that. So interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having that term come up in 2 successive podcasts. So.
I think the universe is trying to tell you something. Have you planted a hugelkultur bed? Maybe you should.
That's right.
I mean, it's the future. You see what fertilizer prices are right now. Like, it's a big crisis, you know, with the current state of affairs. You know, the fertilizer is through the roof. And I mean, that stuff's no good anyway. It's all just like chemical stuff. It doesn't feed the soil long term. Hugelkultur feeds the soil long term. It builds the soil. We're used to thinking of soil as just dirt, as a floor. It's anything but that. It is as much human as you and I. It is absolutely a symbiotic culture of bacterias and fungi living together in the matrix of that original rock dust that the first fungi created for the rest of, you know, for the rest of the world. When you feed the soil and you don't think of it as just like you're feeding the plants, you have to be thinking about feeding the soil and all of the life that's in it. Treat it like an animal, treat it like a human. I mean, you can treat it as like, you know, a god. Like, it is the origin of us all. Even us as human beings, we have more bacteria and fungi in our body, like more cells of bacteria and fungi than we do human cells. We are a walking, you know, I always say we're like a walking SCOBY. If you've ever made kombucha, I don't know if have you ever made kombucha? No, when you make kombucha, it's a fermented tea and you keep a mushroom in it. And it's this weird, like gelatinous mushroom. And it's called a SCOBY, which stands for symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And if you pull it out, because you got to wash it every once in a while, you pull it out, I swear it feels like flesh. Like it's got the weirdest, like fleshy consistency. And it reminds me a lot of like myself or a human or an animal. Yeah.
So, tell us more
about the growing side of it, or do you want to venture on into maybe the third class of mushrooms? We've covered our root mushrooms, we've covered our eating mushrooms. We can go a little bit more into that, or if you want to go into the sacred mushrooms, we could venture on into that. Got quite a bit to say about that too.
Your choice.
Okay, well,
I think all of it's fascinating, and I think it'll address the interest of the audience either.
Okay. Well, I'll make the segue with a little bit more of the culinary mushrooms and just how people in the audience, you and I, how we could grow them, because a lot of people don't know that you can grow mushrooms. People think mushrooms are just something that happen. You go out and you find them, but you can very much cultivate them outdoors in your garden. Say you live in an area under a big tree and you don't get much sun. You're like, darn, I can't really grow a garden here. Well, you can grow mushrooms. It opens up opportunities for people living in really shady, tree-covered places that can't really grow corn and tomatoes and eggplants, and they want to grow some food. Culinary mushrooms can easily be grown in a couple different ways, especially advantageous for folks who don't have any luck doing a vegetable garden because they don't have a lot of sunlight. You can grab logs, usually preferably a hardwood log. I have oak logs in my garden growing shiitake mushrooms. What you would do is you grab a log, and I made the mistake of getting 6-foot long logs that are like this thick. I would only recommend, with my own mistakes that I made, a 3-foot long log that's about 6-7 inches in diameter. And you take a drill bit, you drill holes every 8 inches or so. After about maybe 1 week of the log being cut, you cannot have the log sit around for too long, but you also can't do it right when you cut the tree, because trees do have antifungal properties of their own meant to protect them. So you cut the log, it's got to be fresh, preferably hardwood, and I like oak. You cut the log, you let it sit for a week, and then you start drilling holes in it, and you can get a bag of mushroom spawn or mycelium spawn from a place like the Mushroom People. It's where I got mine, but there are other sources. And you take this bag, and I have an inoculation tool, but you don't have to use it. It will be very, very time consuming and tedious without it. This little plugging, it looks like a little plugging tool. It looks like a little tube with a little button that you press, and you stick it into the spawn, you pull it out, and then you stick it grabs like a little plug of it into that hole, and then you put it into the hole in the log, and you press that button, and it will extrude out a little plug of mushroom spawn. In which case, when you've got your spawn in the hole, you grab some cheese, cheese wax. I've used Vaseline in the past too, because I did it in February and my fingers were about to fall off my hand. It was so cold. Which brings me to when it's best to do it, which is usually about late winter, best time to do it. The trees have a lot of like juices in them at the time, so it's a good time. Like the trees are just getting their juices in there, so you can get a lot of nice wet logs. You put the cheese wax or Vaseline, I prefer the cheese wax, over it, and you let it sit for a year. You let it sit in a nice, cool, moist area. You can cover it with leaves. Make sure you do not let them dry out. Don't let the bark start falling off of them. And about 1 year later, you'll start getting little mushrooms coming out. And the next year you'll get more, and the next year you'll get more. I stacked mine up like a pyre, like, you know, like they're just like little Lincoln logs, but other people have them just stacked along a wall or stacked kind of like a teepee against each other, little lean-to. You can do it if you have a lot of forest on your property. There are other ways, they're a little less involved, where you can take these like logs, or maybe shorter logs. You can put them on the ground, like move some of your substrate. Like I'm talking in a forest. So you move some of the leaves aside, you put these logs down, and then you cover them back up with leaves. That way you'll get mushrooms coming up out of the logs that are in the ground, a little bit more like that type of mushroom that you go out and pick, as opposed to having them in like a cultivation setup like I had just described earlier. And then in the way of morels are commonly seeded. People will seed them on their property by taking some fresh morel. They put it in a blender with some sterilized sawdust and water, and then you mix it all in the blender. You take it during a very wet period of time, and you just pour that slurry over good carbony areas, so like leafy areas, some spots with like leaf litter, stuff for the fungi to eat. You can just pour it over that several areas of your property, and you'll have some morels coming up on your own property for you to pick. That is just, you can do that with several different types, but morels are commonly it's commonly done with morels.
And let me ask you a couple questions. The log that you drill, does it need to be a freshly fallen log, so not one that has deteriorated?
No, because fungi is very territorial. It is extremely territorial. Fungi does not like other fungi. You have a log that's been laying on the ground for a week, you have a log that's already been colonized by fungi. That's what fungi do. They colonize things. That fresh log is a clean, sterile substrate, because logs and trees that are alive have antifungal properties in them. As soon as that log falls and those antifungal properties stop being produced, mushrooms move in. You want to be the one to introduce the mushrooms. You want to be the one to colonize that log, and otherwise the other mushrooms will colonize it for you. That's why it needs to be fresh.
So to be safe, you should cut a limb, not a necessary limb, but a
limb,
small appendage. You should cut it, because you're saying if it's laying there a week, then it's already colonized.
Yep, exactly. You cut it and you can put it like in your garage for a week somewhere where the mushrooms won't get the other mycelium and soil life won't get it. And then it lets the antifungal properties in the log wear off. And then that's when you come in with your drill and your plugging tool and your mycelium spawn and you start plugging that log with the mushrooms you want to grow. You
And
keep it
how
wet.
deep is the hole that
Oh,
you
it's only a
drill?
couple inches. It's an inch, 2 inches tops. Yeah. You
Okay.
don't want it really that deep because the mushrooms do prefer to be like kind of in the softer outer layers. Eventually, they'll colonize the whole log, and you'll be able to tell if the ends of the logs are all white, which is kind of like an indicator of like molds, fungi, mycelial life. But they will first move through those lighter outer layers and eventually take over the whole log.
What about mushrooms? I've heard that people will grow in a box in the
Yeah.
basement, for example.
Yeah. I mean, you can do that with culinary mushrooms. There's certain ones that are easier to grow than others. That's actually exactly how, on a commercial scale, that is a smaller scale, but on a commercial scale, that's how they grow mushrooms that you get at the store, the button mushrooms, the portobello mushrooms. So people can grow them that way. It is a little bit more tedious. You do have to make sure you got like an air purifier in the room. You gotta, make sure that you're not getting trichoderma, which is a type of fungus that just it exists everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in the air. It's like the common like house fungus. It's green. It's really gross. You don't want it on your logs if you notice one of your logs because it can get on logs too. Gets infected with it. You just toss that log, separate it from the rest of them. If you notice it in your box or in your jar, since people do it in jars in a Tupperware, you toss that jar. It's you're a little bit you're more responsible for emulating the natural world for that mycelium, which is a little bit more responsibility than letting Earth do it for you, letting the outside do it for you. Sure, it's
But
a more
that's how
controlled.
people get, I mean, I've seen pictures of entire boxes,
Yeah.
that are loaded with mushrooms. So you get you're farming,
Yeah,
right?
you are farming and it's easy to do it. There's a learning curve, but once you do it a few times, you're able to do it. It's common for psychedelic mushrooms. People will grow cubensis this way, and there are certain ones that they cannot grow this way. Certain fungi will only exist if they are in a symbiotic relationship with roots, such as Amanita mushrooms that are also a psychedelic variety, cannot be grown this way. It is impossible. You are not able to grow them this way because it needs the pine tree's roots to live. Without that symbiosis with the pine tree, it will not fruit for you. It will not survive. It will just die in that box. So you're limited. You can grow some mushrooms. You can't grow them all that way, but it's a great way to farm mushrooms, especially if you don't have like access to outside or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And as I'm thinking about basements, and I think a lot of people uh, raise worms in that kind of environment. Can
Yeah,
worms and mushrooms coexist in the same box?
definitely not. I mean, they do. Every worm bin has definitely got mycelium in it, but you don't want to be farming mushrooms where you're putting raw compost into. It's just you're going to get a whole bunch of different random stuff getting in there. Mushrooms are grown in very controlled environments.
Okay.
You've got, yeah, any sort of food scraps or slop that you give your worms is going to contaminate your fungus immediately. So you're growing fungus. It's not the kind you want to eat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now let's uh, talk about the psychedelic, and you refer to them with a more spiritual term.
I
What
call
did you
them
use?
sacred mushrooms.
Okay.
They're actually a couple of really fun theories about humans and their relationship to mushrooms and how psychedelic mushrooms. There are some theories that credit our brains growing, our consciousness happening, our just realization that we are who we are, the burying of the dead, the things that really separated us from the animals in our evolution. They credit that to our relationship with fungi and our relationship with psychedelic mushrooms. There are Oh, there's a theory, and I'm trying to remember what the name of it is. I think Joe Rogan coined it. I think he called it the stoned ape theory, which is a really funny name, the stoned ape theory. But you think of our ancestors. They're these hunter gatherers, these cavemen with their spears, and we're in Africa. There's wild cattle, these animals. We've come down from the trees. We're standing up tall to look over the grasslands on our legs, and we're following the cattle. We're going after where the cattle are going. Where the cattle are, they move. That's where the people are, and then we move. That was how we originated. But there's a fun thing about cattle, and it's that cattle poop, and they poop a lot. Holy cow, they poop a lot, and their poop is the perfect substrate for psychedelic mushrooms. Even to this day, there are a few better substrates, like cow patties and psychedelic mushrooms go hand in hand. So this theory suggests that humans, in our following of the sacred cows, right, the holy cows, we picked up some of these mushrooms where people, we can eat so many things, and for everything that we can't eat, some human in our ancestors died to figure out that we couldn't eat it. So we tried eating everything. We picked up one of these little mushrooms off the cow patty, we ate it. Suddenly, oh my god, like our eyes got sharper, we became better hunters, we got more energy. There's an analgesic property to them, which is a pain relieving property. Our joints aren't hurting, we're less prone to pain. Sharper, better hunters. And you eat enough of them and you start seeing God. You start to realize why people started burying their dead, why people started having religions, why people started organizing. And I don't think that could have been possible without the trying of that little mushroom on the cow patty, and really separating us from the animal kingdom. Some people, they'll coin that as the forbidden fruit, the fruit of the Garden of Eden, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil that gave us consciousness, that made us aware, that made us realize we were naked. I don't know if I'm quoting like a little bit more biblical, the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, where they tried the fruit. Sure, it was an apple in that story. I think it was a mushroom. I think it was a mushroom that made us see that we were naked and that we had this whole world, this whole consciousness. Animals live in this Garden of Eden where they are just blissfully unaware. They're just doing their thing. They come, they live, they die, they reproduce, they live. But humans, there's something different about us, and that is the knowledge of good and evil. I think that the mushroom gave that to us.
And self-awareness, and the
Yeah.
ability to think in the abstract that we're not sure that animals can do. But
Yeah.
very interesting. And so what are the different types of these mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms?
Oh, there are too many to name, but a couple of the big ones, and they both have their like cult followings, are the Amanita people and the Amanita flyagric, the Amanita muscaria flyagric mushroom types. They're the iconic white dots on the red cap mushroom. And I can actually get a little bit into them because they do show up a lot in European lore, but also all around the world. Then there's also cubensis and a little bit more of the temperate mushrooms. But I wanted to go back to the Amanita because it is so huge, even in our culture today. Another theory that I like to bring in is the theory that Santa Claus is indeed the flyagric Amanita muscaria mushroom. It sounds crazy, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, so Santa Claus, what are his colors? His colors are red and white, much like the Amanita muscaria mushroom. The Amanita muscaria mushroom also grows underneath pine trees, our Christmas tree. The shamans of Siberia, they would wear red cloaks in their symbolism for this mushroom that was so revered. They would go picking the mushroom under these pine trees and hang them up in the pine trees to dry them. These are the first Christmas ornaments. You have them hanging in the trees, these beautiful red balls hanging in the trees, drying on, in the forest, then you have these shamans. They would come and they would, around the solstice time, when people were, in the darkest of times, the days were so short, it was cold, it was hard to survive. These shamans would go from village to village with their bag, this sack full of dried Amanita mushrooms, right? Santa Claus with his presents, his sack of presents. And the snow would get so high in those areas that the original homes there, their doorways would be snowed over for the winter. Going in and out of the chimney was a really common way of getting in and out of your home in Siberia when the snows would be, 10 feet of snow. You couldn't get in and out your front door. They would go from village to village, start dropping these presents in through the chimneys for the village. And that was the way that a lot of people celebrated the solstice. You also hear, Santa Claus, he drives his sleigh of flying reindeer, led by a big red nose. Reindeer absolutely love Amanita mushrooms. They are obsessed with it. They are nature's biggest fans behind human beings, maybe even just as much of a fan as human beings are of mushrooms. And they will eat it, and then they start flying around. They start dancing and prancing and playing and having a little acting like flying reindeer. So that even that comes from somewhere. I mean, this is like a tale of Christmas. Nothing in this story has anything to do with biblical Jesus. A lot of that was appropriated when Christianity moved up into Europe from the Middle East. And the people that had these religions originally, they wanted to, the Romans and the original missionaries, they wanted to be like, okay, how do we convince these people? How do we sell Christ to these people? Well, they already celebrate this celebration. Let's make it about Jesus. And it's funny that even to this day, these traditions still exist, and we don't know that a lot of this stuff doesn't make any sense. Pine trees don't exist in Bethlehem, reindeer don't exist in Egypt, and yet they're so associated with Christmas. And it has to do with this original Amanita tradition, this Amanita shamanic religions of the pagans in Europe, pre-Christian era. They were like, this mushroom was so sacred to them. And even to this day, there's a big cult following. And I say that they are different than the Cubensis people because it is so much more of a spiritual experience. When you're experiencing Amanita mushrooms, people smoke it. You don't smoke Cubensis, you can smoke the Amanita. There's a wonderful woman, Amanita Dreamer is her name. She, or her online presence, and she was about to give up on her life. She was going to kill herself, and she went out into the woods and she was greeted by an Amanita mushroom, and she took that mushroom and it changed her life. It saved her life. It gave her another hope to go on, and she dedicated her life to educating people about mushrooms. She sells mushroom blends and has dedicated her life to as a prophet of the mushrooms. That's one thing that I think a lot of people find with mushrooms is its effect on, and I'm talking about sacred mushrooms, is its effect on our brains and our mental health. Whether it's Cubensis, whether it's Amanita, you have a profound effect, healing effect on the brain that's currently even being researched in medical terms. We've realized that we can't just chemically lobotomize people into submission with all of these drugs that the current mental health system prescribes for people. You're sad, here's a pill for it. You're anxious, here's a pill for it. Everything hurts, here's a pill for it. Can't deal with the passing of your loved one, here's a pill for it. Now we're finally starting to see that by taking back the tradition of using this mushroom medicine, we can give it to people that are dying of terminal conditions and they are having a hard time accepting death, and they can take a trip, and within one trip, I think the study said that 98% of the participants, and don't quote me because I'm not 100% sure, I think it was some very, very overwhelming majority, found peace. They realized there was life after death. They realized that shedding this body wasn't the end. And there's something profound. I don't know if you've ever experienced any sort of mushroom in the past, psychedelic mushroom. No, okay.
I've not, but that also cannabis has similar effects on people. especially in, uh, or anyway.
Yeah, cannabis does. In my time in the cannabis industry, it is an industry that I come from. I have seen it be used and abused a lot as a medicine. I'll say that it's the only medication that is encouraged on a commercial scale to be abused. We wouldn't have all of these high potency products if it were like the case, if that weren't the case. And it does have some negative effects on your mental health if you are a chronic user. I consider it almost like, and I love cannabis myself, don't get me wrong, but it can be used like an opiate where it's very numbing and it's very, it will lower your vibration if you use it constantly. It'll make you dopey. It'll make you lost. Mushrooms, they don't act that way. They act way differently. They act in a way where it expands your mind and gives you this feeling, not that you want to sit on the couch and eat food like you do, with cannabis, but you want to, you feel like you're 5 years old again. You feel like your brain felt like when you were 5. You look at every blade of grass and every leaf on the tree and every bug crawling on the pavement as if it was your first time seeing it. Being a human and having this life that we've the society we've built around ourselves, we've lost a lot of the magic of every day. When you take that mushroom and you're able to experience that for the first time in 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes even 80 years for like people that are trying it for the first time when they're old folks, it brings you to tears. It reminds you like this is what it is. You take enough of it, you feel true love. And I don't say it in a romantic sense. I say true love in this like warm like cloud of a feeling. It's really hard to describe it because it can be called nothing other than love, but it is.
So this was the experience with this certain type of sacred mushroom. And actually I've experienced that, not with a drug, but actually the first time I did transcendental meditation. And
yes. You can access it.
Inside, there was no inside or outside, and this feeling of true bliss at just being alive and the wonder of everything around me. So I know
I couldn't have put it better myself. You found the words that I was looking for. Yeah, that's exactly how it feels. You have just all encompassing bliss. And I feel like folks that are suffering from depression or from other mental conditions, having that just remind them what it means to be human is profoundly therapeutic on our minds. And like the feeling you mentioned, there's no inside, there's no outside, it all is, it's all one. It relieves a lot of anxiety when it comes to all the little things that make us anxious, or even when it comes to our own deaths. We realize that we're not like this person who's alive and then dies. We are like waves in an ocean. We just come up for a little while, we ride our wave, then we collapse back down into the ocean, but we are always part of the ocean, and another wave will arise from that ocean, as has happened for millennia, for as long as life has been.
Yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful experience, and
Yeah.
I'm in awe of the knowledge that you have and that you've brought to yourself, and it's fun and interesting, and I'm sure the audience sees it and appreciates it. So I hope we can keep. We pledged last time that we would keep this going in a series, and
I love it.
You have so much to share that I'll look forward to the next installment. So
yeah, me too. This has been a wonderful experience as always. I'm looking forward to coming on next time and sharing more of my brain things with you. I love this stuff. Never stop learning. Always ask questions. Always, just if you wonder why, get a book on it.
yeah, it's great to know. we're moving more into topics around permaculture. So especially during the growing season when people are interacting more with the earth, it's a good time to do it. Although people will access the podcast at many different times. So
Yeah.
be sure to send us those titles that you recommend, and we'll put them in the podcast. Talk about how people can reach you and the best ways to do that. And we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. Well, our email is always open. At mine is Joanna at earthflowerfarms.co. My partner Staci's is Staci, Staci at earthflowerfarms.co. We're currently building a website, and it should be done toward the end of the month. Earthflowerfarms.co. And that is a good spot to reach us. It's kind of the hub for all of our business stuff, but also we've got a YouTube channel, Earthflower Farms on YouTube, where I share a lot of my garden stuff and just progress on my own garden, my experimental garden here in Chicago, where I try a lot of this stuff and make my mistakes, my trial and error, and I try to just share the progress of this garden from the last several years. I still update that weekly videos. It's a good spot to go if you've got any questions.
And talk about your consulting. What's your focus there?
Yeah, we help individuals and businesses create permaculture solutions for their properties, whether it's figuring out what to do with water that might be sitting in an area that's inconveniencing to them, how to make it natural, or even whether it's something like a new homeowner, as one of our favorite projects to do, is new homeowners that get a home and they don't know where to start. They don't want the boring lawn. They want something a little bit more sustainable, something a little bit closer to this new earth that I think is really emerging. We do like pollinator garden, right now mostly consultations, but we hope to move into like installation and being able to arrange installation, to give people access to like permaculture, pollinator gardens. We do homestead packages where we can set you up with everything that you need to know, and everything that you need to get to have chickens, a vegetable garden, a food forest, a pollinator garden. We also can do food forests, like family you-pick gardens, stuff like that for families that just got a new home and they want something a little bit more sustainable, produce some food on their property. We do all of that, just the consultation, and hopefully very soon the installation as well.
Very nice. Well, this has been great, and I'll look forward to our next episode. And I'm sure you'll be researching to see what to talk about next. Although you've got a plethora of topics already right in there. So
Yeah, I'm like, what to pick. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful rest of your day. It's been a truly enlightening conversation.
great. So thanks everybody for joining us. We're here on a weekly basis. You can find out more about our community and our plans at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. There are lots of ways you can support the podcast and support our efforts, and most of those are right down here in the show notes. So, and come on, download our calendar and come join us and be able to ask questions as we record the podcast. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.